We begin a new series this morning on the book of Ruth. I have created a journal to go along with this called the Ruth Challenge Journal. There are copies of that journal in the foyer, and there are also digital copies of this journal available through our weekly email called Embrace. This journal creates a space for you to complete 4 weekly challenges helpfully summarized by the word Ruth. Every week you're challenged to read the entire book of Ruth. That week it'll take about 15 minutes. Uncover some element from that week's text and sermon in your own life. Third, transcribe, write down 10 to 11 verses from Ruth each week. Over 8 weeks, you'll write the entire book of Ruth out. That will help you notice some details that you might have ordinarily missed. And fifth, heed one of the invitations from the sermon each week. Each week, I'll give 2 or 3 invitations in the sermon from the text. I ask you to lean into one of those each week. That journal will also be a place for you to take notes on each of the 8 sermons in this series. The book of Ruth is a back story. In particular, it is the back story to the story of Christ. Ruth is an ancestor of Jesus. And so it shows us the ways in which God is often active and present in the sometimes unseen and unexpected context of our backstory. When we're wondering what in the world God's up to in our lives, when we're uncertain as to whether or not God is even active in our lives, the book of Ruth invites us to look at the backstory, believing that God is active and visible in those sometimes overlooked contexts of our life. The book of Ruth is an important book in Judaism. It's part of a series of scrolls that contain the 2 books that are named after women, the book of Ruth and the book of Esther. Every year in the Jewish cycle, this book is read during the Festival of Weeks, a time of harvest. One of the major themes of the book is found right here at the beginning, and I'll illustrate it briefly with a mention of a Broadway play called Paradise Square. Kendra and I and our daughter Jordan saw this play a few weeks ago in New York City. Paradise Square tells the true events of a section of Manhattan known in the 1800s as the 5 Points. And what was beautiful about the 5 Points was that it was an area of inclusion, especially for Irish Americans who were discriminated against throughout the rest of the city, and especially for African Americans who were discriminated against throughout the rest of the city. The 5 Points was a rare space of diversity and equity and inclusion. Sadly, the area was decimated in one of the worst race riots in American history by other people in power, but it remains a glimpse of a dream that many people nurture even today. We long for these spaces of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And one of the things that the book of Ruth does is it challenges us to seek those spaces. It challenges us to create those spaces as well. The book begins, as we've just seen in these first 5 verses, with a journey from a land called Judah to a land called Moab. Everything in the rest of the book of Ruth is rooted in this journey between Judah and Moab. In the story, Naomi and her family are forced to leave their hometown, Bethlehem, their homeland, Judah, to head to the foreign nation of Moab. And they land in Moab as refugees, having fled their home nation because of food insecurity because of a famine. In this new foreign country, we would expect them to find hardship and hostility. But surprisingly, Naomi and her family find a home and hospitality. If we could read this story and this movement between Judah and Moab from the perspective of Naomi and the rest of her Jewish family, we would find and remember that there was bad blood between the Jewish people and the people of Moab. Note just these 4 reminders scattered throughout the Old Testament. The king of Moab hired the diviner Balaam to curse Israel and to destroy the Jews in Numbers 22 through 24. Moab was among the oppressors of Israel in the era of the Judges, chapter 3, which takes place just before the book of Ruth. Third, Moabites were forbidden from Israelite religious assemblies, according to Deuteronomy 23. And fourth, in the time of Nehemiah, Israel was to separate from all those of foreign descent, which would also include the Moabites. As a Jewish person, in Naomi's day, we would have biases against the people of Moab. And if we were to flee there as refugees, we would expect to find hardship and hostility. But instead, Naomi and her family find a home. They find hospitality. Apparently, they are welcomed by the people of Moab. They find resources in Moab. They even find love in Moab. Naomi's sons marry wives from Moab. In a way, Moab becomes their 5 points, a place of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then the book moves in just the opposite direction. A woman named Ruth from Moab is forced now to go to the foreign country of Judah. Naomi's husband and sons die, and Ruth goes with Naomi now to what is a foreign country to Ruth, the nation of Judah. She moves there as a migrant. She moves there as a widow. She moves there as someone who is poor. And now, in this foreign country of Judah, we would expect Ruth, the Moabite, to languish. But instead, she flourishes. Not that it was easy for Ruth in Judah. Notice how many times in the book of Ruth, Ruth is defined solely as Ruth the Moabite. 5 times in the text. Ruth in Judah is called Ruth the Moabite. And of course, there's baggage behind this description. It would be like someone saying in our day, Ruth the Mexican, or Ruth that Asian woman. Ruth is only known in Judah by her ethnicity, by her country of origin, because she comes from the country that everyone in Judah loves to hate. And even Ruth realizes that she is known as a foreigner. Notice this reference in chapter 2, verse 10. Then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, Boaz, we'll look at that later, why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? Ruth herself is surprised that in this foreign country, she finds someone treating her with kindness in spite of the fact that she is a foreigner. In fact, Ruth goes on to demonstrate in this foreign country the kind of character that even the insiders might long to have. Notice this in chapter 2, beginning verse 11. But Boaz answered her, speaking to Ruth, all that you have done for your mother-in-law, Naomi, since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land, Moab, and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you've done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you've come to take refuge. The fact that Ruth has left her homeland and now settled in Judah as a migrant, as someone who is poor, and yet someone who is now striving to provide for her mother-in-law, Naomi, has gained her acclaim throughout Bethlehem and Judah. In fact, in this story, it's Ruth, the outsider, who demonstrates the one quality that all the people of Judah are called to. It is the quality known as chesed, loving kindness. In Micah chapter 6, verse 8, God calls all the people of Judah and Israel to practice chesed. He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness, chesed, and to walk humbly with your God. And in the book of Ruth, Ruth is the one who is described as the one who shows chesed. So in Ruth chapter 1 and verse 8, Naomi describes her in this way. Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Go, return each of you to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly, chesed, with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me." And then in chapter 3, verse 10, Boaz describes Ruth with this word chesed. And Boaz said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness, chesed, greater than the first, in that you've not gone after young men, whether poor or rich." It's Ruth, the outsider, who practices chesed, even towards people who are outsiders to her. And so in this story, we have refugees from one country finding hospitality and home in a country where we'd expect them to find hardship and hostility. We have a migrant settling in a foreign country and flourishing where we would expect her to languish. And all of that is part of the backstory we're told at the end of Ruth to the story of Jesus, telling us that part of the backstory of Jesus is a surprising story of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and inviting us to make diversity, equity, and inclusion part of our stories as well. Now, sadly, those are not always the spaces that we create. These are not always the stories that we inhabit. Remember how just a few weeks ago, 53 migrants from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador died after being trapped in a sweltering tractor trailer in Texas, making it one of the deadliest human smuggling tragedies on U.S. soil. Naomi could have been in that truck. Ruth could have been in that truck. Sometimes the spaces that we create are the opposites of the spaces that Naomi and Ruth experienced in their journeys. This is one reason why a few months ago we launched our Friends Speak ministry. It is a ministry that allows us to provide conversational English lessons and friendship to people in our community who are like Ruth and Naomi. It's one reason why organizations like Building One Community are so vital in our community, because they provide a number of resources to people who are to us just like Ruth and Naomi. Ken Kalfas is the author of a new book called 2 a.m. in Little America. And in this book, he imagines what it would be like if something happened in America that was similar to what Naomi's family experienced in that famine that led them to Moab as refugees, or similar to what's happening in Ukraine, or what has happened in Syria, or what has happened at times in Central America. That is, what if Americans had to flee our hometowns and our homeland and settle as migrants or immigrants or refugees in foreign countries? And what if small ethnic neighborhoods in those foreign countries, called Little Americas, were our only taste of home? That experience might convince us of the absolute necessity of this strong theme in the book of Ruth, the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Each week in this series, I'll provide a number of invitations. And this morning, I want to ask you to lean into one of these this week. Practice hospitality toward an outsider this week. Or identify and name your own biases toward an outside person or group. Or volunteer in a ministry or nonprofit that assists outsiders. Take this moment of silence to consider which of these you'll lean into this week.